It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
you can have your religious freedom as long as it doesn't impinge on anything that
Mhm.
we decide is off
Yeah,
limits. Yeah, you're
yeah,
free to go off and do what you want, but just
yeah.
don't make
I
it
mean,
count for anything.
the thing that the thing is, you're free to have any religion you want as long as it's not religion.
Mm,
Actually,
mm.
I
Yeah, yeah,
mean,
yeah. Yeah.
this purely private faith. I mean, um, that's not what religion has ever meant in history
Hmm. Sure.
until recently.
I mean, understanding freedom today, most people would say, okay, it's a choice between contraries or choice, uncompelled choice.
Right.
Um, and I guess, yeah, but maybe that's so. I guess what I
Mhm.
want to say is also it's difficult. It's difficult to look at sort of the water you swim in or the
Right.
lenses you have on. It's very hard.
Right.
So I almost can't articulate some of these things, and maybe that's why I think this conversation will really help me out and somebody else who's at my level. They can also then begin to understand this.
Well, let me, before talking about that in particular,
Yep.
just comment on something you mentioned in the setting up the question, but just how certain moral questions, hot button issues can be something of a trigger, or like an initial something that initially catches a person's attention.
Yep.
I had a friend. I thought this was really fascinating. One of the smartest people I have known. Was first sort of turned on to consider Christianity, and he's had
Hmm.
very a long journey. But it was the church's teaching on contraception,
Hmm.
which is curious because in one respect you'd think, okay, this is something that is would really only be it's such a radically countercultural thing that only someone who's already in the church can understand it. And there's a certain truth to
Hmm.
that. But what struck him, and this has stayed with me, what struck him so much is that precisely that point, that this is a moral issue that the church can't possibly win. I mean, there's no one in the
Hmm.
culture that you win favor with absolutely no one
Yeah,
to
yeah.
hold fast to this issue. And I mean, the fact of holding fast to it in spite of the drift of the culture suggests that there has to be, there's no other reason
Mm, mm, yeah,
for the
yeah, yeah,
truth of it to hold on to it. And
yeah.
there's something really interesting about that. I think that's worth reflecting on. Okay,
Definitely, yeah.
that a sort of a side note, that the more basic issue, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's uh, precisely what motivated me to think about freedom was
Hmm.
the couple of things that you mentioned. First of all, it seems to be so basic and so fundamental for everyone. It's one of the few issues that seems to bridge the different sides of the great polarities that we talk about.
Hmm.
Between left and right, liberal and conservative, and so forth. Everybody wants to be free.
Hmm.
Whether you're religious or secular or whatever. This is something. It's one of the very, very few things that seems like everybody
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
agrees on, and that's in itself remarkable. And then the second thing for me was another point that you mentioned is it's so fundamental to who we are that it turns out, and this becomes clear once one begins reflecting on it, the nature of freedom, the way we understand freedom, what we identify with freedom, what we associate with freedom, because it lies so fundamentally in our consciousness and our culture, it
Hmm.
shapes just about everything else. It'd be hard to find something that bears on so many dimensions of our culture and our existence as freedom does. So for me, it became an issue when I started thinking about, what are the cultural issues that warrant serious reflection and inquiry. Freedom was one of the ones that stood out most
Hmm.
basically to me. So if you want, and what is it exactly, and what is the problem? I think I can summarize that fairly simply.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, and you've again already sort of hinted at this, but
Mm,
I think for the most part we tend to think of freedom as unrestrained choice. That to be free is to be able to make up your mind for yourself. That you in a way, there are no obstacles to your choosing. So
hmm.
if we go a little bit more deeply into that, we see that the general assumption is that freedom is more or less the same as potency, possibility, potential, power.
Yeah.
All these concepts are philosophically very deeply related to each other, but basically power to choose, and typically power to choose among alternatives.
Yeah.
So that's what we identify with freedom. And the thing is, what's interesting about this is, it's one of the reasons it's compelling is that there's a truth to it. I mean, there's something. It's not a false concept. It's just, I would argue, a partial view. It's one aspect of the whole truth that is isolated from the deeper dimensions. And it seems to me that doesn't mean we just it's good in itself, but we just need to add some other features in order to get a whole concept. We have to be careful, very careful about how we integrate that point with the rest in our understanding of freedom. Now, to try to be sort of concrete about it, if we simply accept that as the definition of freedom, to think about the kinds of things that follow, what is required for freedom, or what is it then that we have to resist in order to preserve freedom? And it becomes apparent to start unfolding that. I mean, there are many things. Any relationship becomes an obstacle to freedom. Any obligation, any moral truth itself, the church, the family, society. I mean, all of these things are constrained.
Exactly. I think the one way I thought about it was, I mean, if we define it as choosing between options, then the more options I have, the more freedom I have. And I mean, power, you mentioned power, that allows me that opens up more options to me. And, we can take that further and say technology offers me, I mean, that's a form of power. Technology offers me more options, and also money, for example, that is a form of power that allows me more options. And I think you can then sort of see this ultimately, like you said, even logic itself, truth itself becomes any constraint on an option is in the way. And we can see clearly the rebellion against that. We have to remove, even my body can't tell me who I am. Like, I need to be free because it's constraining. And so that's very interesting. I think it also sort of goes into, I mean, ultimately, if you're in a virtual world, you're literally divorced from reality, and you can be a flying pink unicorn, and then nothing holds you back. And we're seeing that sort of trend.
Right. No, we are seeing that. And the thing is, I mean, do we in fact experience those things as freedom? If you're floating in outer space and there's no constraint to your movements, according to this definition, that would make you supremely free in one respect. But I mean, it's very obvious if you reflect on it that that's so empty. Nobody would want that. And in fact, you would feel impotent with this complete lack of constraint. You would actually feel fairly impotent. It's sort of like, the classic thing about being faced with, 3,000 different kinds of cereal breakfast.
Is
that liberating, or is that,
or, it's kind of paralyzing.
Like the something a little more concrete, but like internet radio, where you suddenly discover that there are something like 30,000 radio stations available to you. I mean, in one sense, that's kind of exciting. You think, oh, this is really neat, but you can't live with that. And in fact, I mean, I think that there have been psychological studies that we actually have an easier time making choices and feeling free if our options are actually fairly narrow. We actually prefer, in spite of what we often think, we actually prefer to have some guidance and some constraints on our choices.
Some sort of filtering, or I mean, if you're, I think it reminds me of, I mean, Jonathan Peugeot, he talks a lot about unity and sort of multiplicity and disunity. And I guess it's something like that. I mean, unity will always put some constraints on you. If you take those away, you're just going to decay. And like you're saying, that ends up, then you become an atom or floating in space. And it's like, okay, you don't have constraints, but is it really conducive to your life? That if you have so much freedom that you become dust. Dust is free. It's not constrained by anything, or you decay or you decompose.
That's right.
your body has a constraint on it in the sense that it lives, so it must work together in a particular way. So I think that leads to the question, okay, if that's just a part of freedom, then how do we understand freedom more broadly, or in a more
Yeah.
according to the tradition?
Well, I really like the example that you gave about your body being constrained.
Mm,
There's a great multiplicity of things, functions and dimensions and
yeah.
systems that constitute the body, and they're all organized. They're all interconnected, and this is something that we've come to understand. I mean, I think we understood better in the distant past, and we're starting to recover a sense of it
Hmm.
now. There's a sort of a modern in enlightenment thought where we kind of lost a sense of all that.
Yeah.
But you've got there's an energy, there's a kind of creative spirit
Hmm.
that's is constituted in this um, integration of multiplicity. When unity and multiplicity come together,
Hmm.
um, that's part of what life is. It's part of what beauty is, but I think it's also part of what freedom is. And I think that actually helps us understand a bit better what true freedom is. It has something more to do with life.
Mm.
Life would be an expression of freedom, to be alive,
Hmm.
um, than just the mere multiplication of options. And when you start thinking about life, you start thinking in more, you might say, intensive terms rather than just expansive
Hmm.
terms. And that allows us, I think, to understand what the classical tradition has in mind when it affirms that true freedom is rooted in the good, rooted in
Hmm.
goodness.
Hmm.
Uh, and notice that word root. I mean, it's life again. It's like a plant rooted in healthy
Hmm.
soil.
Yes.
That precisely because of this bond, and really a permanent bond for the life of the plant.
Mm.
It stays in the
Hmm.
soil. That's what allows it to grow and to flourish, and in a way to realize its real potentials.
Yeah.
Um, if a plant were to think, if I could only get my roots out of this ground, then I
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
really be free. I mean,
Hmm.
that's the end of
Hmm.
freedom.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and there's something analogous in human life. When we attach ourselves to things that are genuinely good,
Hmm.
um, our freedom expands. But it expands, you might say, from within rather
Yeah.
than in
Yeah.
the abstract sense of just multiplying
Hmm. That's a
options.
very nice image. Yeah. Um, so I can sort of seem like the pushback to that may be something like, um, I guess it's kind of circular, because if you start off with the definition that
Yeah,
freedom is us choosing between options, and
right,
then we say, okay, choosing, aligning that freedom to the good. I mean, the second question is how do we define that? But
right.
any sort of limitation on my options seems like I'm being constrained in my freedom.
Yeah.
But it's kind of self referential. It's like you're starting with a definition, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah. And
yeah.
I mean, with fundamental things, there's always going to be something self-referential. It's hard to,
Mm,
things that are fundamental, you can't demonstrate them on the basis of something else because then you make
fair
it.
enough. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there is something, but that's why when I try to talk about these things, I don't try to make a demonstrative argument
Hmm.
compelling through a logical syllogism. I appeal to our experience,
Mm,
um, and images and metaphors and things. I think that's a better way to
sure.
grasp something
Yeah, yeah.
fundamental. So I
Hmm.
mean, we have the experience of being feeling empty in
Mm,
front of a sheer multiplicity of options without any sense of one of them being better than another.
hmm. Hmm.
I don't think we experience that as liberating. Now, obviously, we also can feel a lack of liberation if someone says this is good for you and you have no choice but this.
Hmm.
And I'm telling you that it's good for you, and um, that's that's true too. We want
Yeah.
to have some sense of having um, what's good not imposed on us in a kind of an extrinsicist way. We want to have a sense of participation and some experience of it actually being ours and coming from us.
Yeah, and
Um,
discovering
but,
it in
but
some sense.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
and but I think that those things are not intention. I mean, I think
Hmm.
um, that's why, if you are trying to encourage freedom. So, for example, with my children, I had a long conversation with my son last night about virtual reality, and he wanted
Hmm.
to know why it wouldn't be simply a good thing if we can invent a virtual reality that was perfectly pleasant
Hmm.
and had some way of sustaining ourselves physically in the
Sure, sure.
background. Why not live that way? Why wouldn't
Yeah.
that be? And that's a hard question to answer.
Hmm.
And rather than saying, well, because it's wrong, and
Hmm.
so trust me, I said, you have to be delicate. You have to treat it's if it's connected to life, there's a kind of delicacy that with working with plants as well. Gentle.
Hmm.
You have to coax. You have to introduce things in a way that's organic and so forth. So I just said, I asked him to think about some things, and I said,
Hmm.
um, consult your experience and pay attention to things that you do that give you momentary excitement, but then
Hmm.
maybe leave you feeling empty afterwards, or those experiences that actually fill you with a kind of a joy, and they last, and
Hmm.
just and I said, I'm not going to tell you ahead of time what I think those experiences will be. You find those,
Yes,
and you
yes.
can and pay attention and hold on to what brings joy. And it seems to me that those are the kinds of things you realize. It's not being imposed; it's being suggested, but it
Mm.
also requires you um, to bind yourself at some point. You need to be responsive. You can't be passive in this. You actually,
Yeah.
I mean, so that sort of brings in a whole other dimension to this. This idea that true freedom is a real participation in the good doesn't mean the choice doesn't matter. It
Hmm.
means that
Hmm.
choice
Hmm.
is really crucial, but we have to think about
Yeah.
choice in a different way. There's a very passive kind of flippant sort of whimsical sense of choice, where
Mm.
without any real engagement or consideration, you just select one thing or another,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I think it's not hard to see that that's not a good way of making choices, and those are the kinds of choices we often end
Yeah,
up
yeah.
regretting later. We
Mm.
need to learn to choose properly. We need to be
Hmm.
trained to be able to make a choice with the whole of ourselves, and invest ourselves in a choice and stick with it. So choice that's a choice thought in terms of the classical tradition rather than choice thought in terms of the modern liberal tradition.
Yeah, that's
Does
very
that I don't know,
interesting.
is that making some
No, no,
sense?
it's yeah, yeah, no, definitely. So, I mean, I think could we say something like, if you like when you come to choose something, it needs to have there needs to be something beyond it that's guiding that choice, right? I think this is the key
Mhm.
thing that's maybe that differs between,
Yeah,
let's say, the choosing just willy-nilly something,
yeah,
versus something that has a purpose, has an end. And so your choices and your freedom is guided not simply
right.
by your whim in this moment, but it's there's some overlying principle, some telos to that action. Is that sort of
Yeah,
the difference? Whereas today you would say, look, I choose because I feel like, or whatever. Today it's this, tomorrow it's that, and there's no. And again, it then
yeah,
goes to the unity multiplicity kind of angle. Um, but it's
yeah,
somehow that the freedom or the choices are embedded in a sort of a higher structure that guides them. So the choices
yeah,
maybe still be
no,
there, present,
yeah,
but you're sort of guided.
yeah, and guided by basic questions about what's good,
Yeah.
what's true and beautiful, the transcendental, because there are a lot of things that can guide us.
Hmm. Sure.
Um, you know, one of the things that my son and I argue about is
Mm.
he's constantly defending a very pragmatic approach. Why not
Hmm.
have all of your choices guided by the question, what will make me the most money in the
Yeah,
long run?
yeah.
Why isn't that, a
The
principle to
guiding
live by?
principle. Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, yeah, there you're being guided, but you're being guided by something I would say is not, it
Hmm.
is not. So it's very complex, and this is why um, virtues like prudence are so crucial. And prudence is, I think, sorely
Hmm.
misunderstood. in the contemporary world. Prudence, there's a sort of a grace and a kind of genius required
Mm,
for real prudence, which is a prudence. When I think about prudence, I think about like athletes, and an athlete is somebody like a genius athlete. An outstanding athlete is one who, without even having to reflect much, knows exactly what to do. A
mm,
quarterback knows exactly who to pass it to,
mm,
and is reading all these details and seeing the particularities of situations, but is coming to a judgment
mm.
about them that has a sense of what the point is,
Yes. Yeah.
what's good, what's being
Hmm.
sought,
Hmm.
and sees exactly how that can be brought into being in this moment. That's what I think. That's what good free choice is.
Choice would be, yeah. Versus
Yeah,
just like running around on the field with the ball, and
yeah,
just being you're free to do
that's
so.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm,
And
okay.
you can have people that have great physical abilities but don't have that judgment.
Hmm.
So that's, and why do I bring that example of it? Because there is something you're simultaneously consulting a kind of a transcendent and an immanent criterion. You're both
Hmm.
looking for what's good and attending to how it resonates in you. And both of those criteria are at work in a good choice, it seems to
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
Um, and that it's hard because there's not a simple blueprint in how to do that well. Just like you can't, just have a textbook course on how to be a good quarterback or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you have to do it and find mentors and
Hmm.
models who exhibit a certain excellence that you would like to achieve. Alistair McIntyre has written some wonderful things about this,
Hmm.
a kind of mentoring
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I think.
training of virtue in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, so this idea of apprenticeship or mentoring is
Yeah,
something also that's been almost, well, not lost, but it's definitely not the way most people go about learning. It's
yeah,
university, or it's not so personal anymore. And um,
yeah.
but yeah, so I mean, if we talk about I think that's a good point. With there are you can be guided by different things, and I guess
Mhm.
that's part of the reason why we're seeing this division these days too. Is we I mean, as I kind of understand it, it depends how far back you want to go. Do you want to go back to Enlightenment, or
Yeah,
do you want to go Protestant Reformation, or further back before that? Um, but it seems to me that how can we understand, um, or let me put it this way. So I think the sort of the moral issues we're seeing, or even breakdown of culture and arts, for example, um, they are symptoms of something deeper. One of the things, I guess, is how we understand freedom, right? It's no longer rooted in the good.
yeah,
So then the architect is free to create some monstrosity because that's just the current fashion, or his will, um, or maybe even consciously going against those principles that were considered
yeah.
traditionally
That's
beautiful.
right.
Um, and so yeah, but does that link to sort of this individualism that we have in society? Are those concepts related? If we go back, this modern notion of like being this individual society, I mean, as just a group of individuals, um, is that something? That's also something that I'm trying to figure
Yeah.
out. Like, I mean, is that something how society saw themselves? Going back in history, is this something like a novel
Yeah.
invention, or yeah?
Yeah, yeah, no. Well, a book you might find interesting. It's a intellectual historian named Larry Siedentop, and the book is called, I think it's called "Inventing the Individual,"
Inventing
and
the
it's a
okay.
reading of European history.
Hmm.
And his argument is, and this is, um, I think he's coming at it from a different angle, but it's an argument that I would basically affirm myself.
Hmm.
and that is um, the individual that this there's a it, you can read the intellectual history of the West as a story of on the one hand, it depends on the how far back you want to go,
Yeah.
but Christianity sort of taking up the classical currents um, and realizing them in sort of dialogue with the cultures of the barbarians in the different lands, is sort of out, so this great sort of synthesis. Um, all of that was, it's an incredibly complex
Hmm.
movement that involves, all, I mean, an almost infinite number of different influences and sources, but they were all held together by a sort of central principle, which
Hmm.
was the principle of the Christian faith, precisely as historically embodied in the church.
Hmm.
And in that culture, of course, people had individual freedom and had an understanding of themselves as individuals and roles, but their sense of individuality was never abstracted from participation in the family, participation
Hmm.
in the community, in the guild, in the town, in the manor, in the religious order, and so forth. That life was just parts were always ordered in relation to a whole, and
Hmm.
spontaneously that's how things were organized. Now, arguably, if you look at the sort of the big picture, um, the, the one of the things that has most defined the modern world, that the most basic origins of the modern world were precisely an unraveling of that basic unity and an
Hmm.
effort to rethink these various dimensions of human life outside of the context of this actual body of the church, and
Hmm.
kind of an alternative. So, and what's so interesting about that is you realize that the church, understood in these terms, made a claim on the whole of human existence, the whole cosmos, really.
Hmm.
And so, in order to have any freedom from that, in this negative sense of freedom,
Yeah. Yeah.
to have some sort of space from that, you actually have to rethink every dimension of human existence. You have to
Hmm.
rethink the meaning of the cosmos, the meaning of economics, the meaning of um, work, and so forth. I mean, every dimension of human life gets rethought of in now according to a principle of unity that's other than the church.
Hmm.
And the principle that proposed itself, and this can be shown historically, is you might say the idea of the autonomous individual.
Hmm.
Um, in the one hand, theologically speaking, the individual in God as the center
Hmm.
in the Protestant Reformation, and then you have the nation states that grow up around that. You have a
Hmm.
rethinking of economics and culture, even of the sciences, no longer a cosmological vision, but a more sort of pragmatic vision.
Hmm.
I mean, so all the dimensions of life get rethought of according to a different model. So in a way, there's still a
Yeah.
unity that's holding it all together. But ironically, the unity is this idea that we're all individuals,
Yeah. 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 That's
as money put on.
yeah. Um, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it reminds me of, sort of um, uh, Copernicus puts the Earth, no longer in the middle, and then Darwin puts humans no longer,
Yeah,
sort of in the
yeah,
center, but in a line with other apes. So you kind of, and then with Freud, that we can't sort of, even our own thoughts are somehow subconsciously influenced, and so this moving away from sort of yeah, of having this idea or understanding that that yeah, we are somehow unique, and that we are made in the image of God, um and then replacing that just with, okay, it's sort of arbitrary. I mean, that, and then you can sort of break out of those systems in that way.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
And,
exactly so it's a disintegration, and you're exactly right. You see it on
mm,
all. I mean, so even personal identity. I can't even say I. When I say I, that's just a word I'm using to describe
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
accidental convergence of various influences and natural causes and so forth. I mean, everything really unravels.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we're beginning to see cultural implications of that that are pretty disturbing,
Mm,
and I think more and more people are becoming aware that there's something really uh, yeah, threatening
sure, sure.
occurring in
Yeah.
this movement
I
culture.
think that, yeah, this idea that, once you took away the superstitions and the religion, you would get enlightened, rational individuals, bound in these higher ideals. The humanism project, it is clearly
Yeah,
is unraveling and revealing something quite
yeah,
dark
yeah.
and sinister. Yeah, but it's amazing because, I mean,
Humanism leads to
just in, sorry.
I say humanism leads to transhumanism. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
I mean, you really don't have any real reference point for anything or anchor
yeah,
for anything.
yeah, yeah. But it's amazing. I mean, that people. I mean, I was in Auckland City the other day. There's a huge billboard that says "Faith, not reason." No, sorry, other way around.
Mhm.
Reason, not faith, and it's from
Yeah,
like the Auckland Humanist Society. It says something like
yeah.
human rights, liberty, and truth, or something like this. And yeah, you wonder Anyway, so that still exists, of course. It's kind of
No,
running out
no,
of steam.
that's
But
actually yeah, no, it is. But see, and this is the thing. I mean, it's funny. Faith, not reason, is troubling, but so is, or sorry, reason, not
yeah,
faith, is troubling, but so is faith, not reason. I mean,
of course, yeah.
what we're also seeing a kind of reactionary um, stance that wants to recover the religious dimension, wants to recover, the significance of some transcendent good and so forth. The problem is that it's done in a way that's not integrated, and so
Yes.
it really becomes reactionary and just as disintegrating. It participates in the disintegration and the violence of the disintegration in a new way. That's why there's no answer to any of this, it seems to me, outside of
Mm,
a recovery of the actual tradition that um, that existed in history that was given
hmm
to us.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
you can't reinvent things. You can't reinvent a tradition.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't.
Paradox.
I
Yeah.
mean, right. No, it is a paradox, but we're seeing that. That's why some of these traditionalist movements that are springing up that I have some sympathies for, I
Hmm
also worry about because I think
hmm
they tend to be repetitions of a kind of fragmentation
hmm
at a deeper level. It's
Yeah.
it's it's a it's a it's a delicate matter.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. But about the yeah. So what I was trying to say is also it reminds me of you've heard maybe Richard Dawkins say that he's now a cultural Christian, and I've seen sort of other things pop up here and there, the rise of cultural Christianity. So which to me is yeah. I mean Christianity without Christ is, I mean, that's the definition of the Antichrist. So
That's right.
so what do you think about that kind of movement that people
Yeah,
are now recognizing? Okay, look, humanism didn't work. Look, why don't we
yeah.
just, I don't know what their idea is. You just pretend like it's true, or you tell your kids like it's
Well, see
Santa
that.
Claus, and
Yeah.
then when they're older, you tell them actually, it's not real, but we just sort of all agree that
Yeah.
it helps us. So
No, no, you're exact. That's Zizek has some funny
mhm,
characterizations of the way an ideology works. And
yeah,
the Santa Claus thing is an example where the parents don't believe it, and
hmm
they know that the kids don't believe it. The kids know that the parents know
yeah, yeah,
that they don't believe it and so forth, but everyone just sort of plays along just to because this is
mm,
how the holiday works, and that
yeah,
ideologies are like that, and that's
hmm
faith can become an ideology, and so cultural Christianity in that sense is problematic, and that's something that's been tried. I mean, that was the integralism um, of the 19th century, and some of
hmm
these movements that wanted to restore Christianity precisely because of sociological um, necessities. But
okay,
but again, one has to be very careful because one might think, okay, so we can't be just a cultural Christian. So we then will set culture aside and say, you need to have the personal faith, and it's not as easy as that. I mean, because that can become, faith not reason, faith not culture, faith not history,
sure,
faith
sure,
not
yeah,
church. You know, um, we do need to be cultural Christians, and we
Yeah, yeah.
do need to be uh, philosophers and scientists and so forth as believers, because
As believers,
we
yeah,
need
yeah.
to the whole world with us into our faith. So yes, at the core of that is a personal assent um, to the gift of faith
Hmm.
in Christ, that is a spiritual act. That's at the core of it. But if that doesn't resonate out into the world and into history, then
Hmm.
it, and that's why in a way it is harder to believe. Yeah, it is harder to be a Christian now, for the exact opposite reason that Kierkegaard thought it was hard to be a Christian now. So
Hmm.
he thought it was hard to be a Christian because of the culture was so Christian
Yeah, yeah.
that one tended almost automatically to do it in a kind of passive way.
Hmm.
But I think in a way it's harder for us. It's even harder now for us because we don't have the luxury of just making it a personal act.
Mm.
There's a curious way in which it's easier to be just a pure individual.
Sure, sure, yeah.
Kierkegaard saw that as kind of a
Hmm.
heroic act, but there's what does it mean when it has to recover? And it doesn't mean simply that we need to give public witness to our faith. We
Hmm.
actually need to work with others in the recovery of a Christian form of everything.
Everything, yeah,
So,
sure. Yeah.
you know, um, uh, our work
Hmm.
is a principal place, but our home, our community, and so forth. All
Yeah.
of these things that have to receive the form of
Mm.
Christ.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting point, and also it leads to this whole idea of also, a hallmark of our society is the separation of church and state, and you're meant to keep religion out of when you go to work. You don't talk
That's
about
right.
religion, and it doesn't inform you. And this idea that we have religious freedom. I think I watched one of your talks. Maybe I think it was with Bishop Barron, um, and you made the point that it's a facade. It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
you can have your religious freedom as long as it doesn't impinge on anything that
Mhm.
we decide is off
Yeah,
limits. Yeah, you're
yeah,
free to go off and do what you want, but just
yeah.
don't make
I
it
mean,
count for
I
anything.
mean that's. I mean, the thing is, you're free to have any religion you want as long as it's not religion.
Mm,
Actually,
mm.
I
Yeah, yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, this purely private faith. I mean, um, that's not what religion has ever meant in
Hmm.
history
Sure.
until recently. But yeah, it's just like you're free to think anything you want. You're free to have your truth. Well, I mean,
Mm.
think about what that means. What your truth means true for you and not for anybody else. It's not really true.
No, yeah.
It's a complete equivocation to
It's
use the
a
word
it's a
truth.
delusion. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, it becomes a purely empty act because
Mm.
it can't even be true for you.
Mm. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Because
if
you can't act on it. Yeah.
because if it's really true for you, it has to bind you somehow. But if you're free to change your mind in the very next second,
Yeah.
then it's not even true for you. So
Hmm.
this idea of your truth is the evacuation of truth simply. And it seems
Hmm.
like I'm respecting you. I'm compromising your humanity in a radical way by
Hmm.
giving you freedom of thought in this sense.
Yeah. Well, I think
Because
these days,
I'm removing, I'm undermining the very essence of what thought is.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, with this your truth, my truth, I think people just are replacing the word like my experience or
Yeah,
with my, it's, how some people use it anyway, my truth is that I was raised this way or something. It's like, that's not really, you're not using it incorrectly,
right.
but
No,
yes.
and that it just it brings sets into relief how um, yeah, the deception
Mm,
that we've been living with, in a way for centuries.
sure. Yeah.
Um, that what the liberal project as a kind of an alternative to the Christian tradition, what the liberal project is is just setting up a sphere, a public sphere, um, in which, there's a sort of a level playing field. So everybody has their space, private space protected so that they can, um, pursue their own sense of what's true. And, all that sounds, it's hard to say why that would be, on the surface, that just, it's hard to object to that. And it
Mhm.
seems like it's allowing you, in fact, to hold on to traditional ideas because none of that's being excluded. You're allowed to hold your traditional faith. You're allowed to hold all these things. But in fact, that's not the case.
Mhm.
You're allowed to hold the traditional faith as long as it's not actually traditional faith in the way that
Mhm.
faith has been understood in the tradition. It has
Yeah.
to take a new form
Mhm.
that is now being imposed on without your consent, without your, it's a priori
Mm.
being enforced and policed and imposed on you in a way that is if you can see this, you recognize it's just as totalitarian as the big totalitarian systems of the 20th century. It's
Yeah,
just more
yeah.
subtle.
Yeah, that's so I've been watching I guess there's some your colleagues maybe from New Polity or you at least so they have a
Okay.
great series on tyranny, which is also eye-opening. And
Right.
because yeah, we tend to think okay, tyranny is something like a communism or a fascism, and now we live in um, we're free now, right? Because I can be Christian and my neighbor can be Muslim, and we can choose what we want. But it's something like I guess is it right to say that we assume that it's a neutral, like we live in a neutral kind of society
Mhm.
where in fact the way that you've kind of put it forward is that no, that there is a it's yeah, it's hard to describe. It's like
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
how would you go about with somebody who would say, look, I am free I can be a Buddhist or I can be whatever, and I can do rock climbing, I can do whatever. Like it's not like the state is coming in and telling me what typically in a tyranny is, it's clamped down control. Like in communism, you can't own anything or whatever. But it seems to me that we are allowed our freedom and choice. Um, but you said it's more subtle. Is the subtlety more the fact that just the box that's put on you is just a little bit wider as compared to what we typically think? A tyrant is coming down and clamping down on you, and
Yeah. It's I don't know if it's wider. It's just it's more subtle. I mean,
mm,
it's you are allowed. So um, we have an experience of being able to choose, like as you say, go rock climbing one day, do something else the other day. I can be
yeah,
whatever I want. I can quit my
hmm
job tomorrow,
sure,
start
yeah,
something different.
hmm
I'm free to divorce my wife according
hmm
to, I can, so I have all these choices that in an older age I wouldn't have had. So in a
sure,
certain sense, it feels like I have more power.
hmm
But this is the argument they make in Freedom from Reality. It's a
hmm
power that's precisely unreal, and it increases in its power to the extent that it divorces from reality,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's
okay,
why there's a kind of deception. So
mm,
so it's not like we just have a little more space to make our choices. In a way, it's an infinite space to make our choices,
hmm
but we purchase that, you might say, at the cost of having none of those choices matter.
mm, hmm
And what we're choosing, it's sort of like it's being neutralized. You're giving a list of options, and you can pick any one of those. You can be a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian
yeah,
or a Jew. I can
yeah,
pick any of those things, and so they're presented on a menu of options.
yeah,
But notice, I mean, none of those realities, anybody that has ever read a book
mm,
uh, knows that none of those realities has ever existed as an option on a menu.
hmm
There are histories. There's a whole interpretation of reality that an inherited way of life and mode of being and so forth that are connected with each one of those.
mm.
That if I look at them as options on a menu, um, I'm separating it from all of that, and so they're being turned into virtual reality versions
Sure,
of
yeah, yeah.
things.
So the options you're offered
So, so,
are
so that's the thing.
yeah, 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 I get what you mean. So, you're offered these options or you can do these things, but they've been redefined, So
That's exactly it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
and that's why, and they've all been redefined. So in a way, it's hard to object because you're saying, because the person can say, look, you can have any of these that you want,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but in a really profound way, they've all been evacuated. So you can have any of these, but on our terms.
Sure, sure, yeah. Hmm.
But see, this is where it gets even trickier, is that I'm denying that I'm setting any terms.
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
just imposing them on you in this kind of hidden way.
Yeah, that's
And
what
that's why
makes it
it's a sort
difficult.
of
Yeah.
thing. It's easier. But this is a point that even Tocqueville makes, and there have been uh, some really interesting writers like Solzhenitsyn. And there's a
Hmm.
way in which you can. It's easier to hold on to your humanity when the tyrant is standing over and against you in a kind of an
Hmm.
explicit way, demanding
Hmm.
something.
Yeah.
Um, then it kind of gives you the occasion of heroism
Hmm.
or martyrdom, that you can
Hmm.
actually stand for something. But what if the tyrant makes no demands on you at all,
Hmm.
and it doesn't impose anything in any obvious way? In a way, I mean, this is why it's so tricky. You don't even have
Yeah.
the
Something to
occasion
push
to,
against. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and so you're robbed of even the occasion of manifesting your humanity through
Hmm.
a kind of an act of heroism. You just sort of disappear, you
Yeah.
know.
It's interesting because the places where the church is persecuted is where you find a true faith and the church grows and in places
Yeah,
where it's allowed in a way that is not really you're allowed to do it, but what you're allowed to do is not really the true faith
yeah,
in some sense. It starts to dissolve. Is that kind of linked to that? Because what reminds me of
yeah,
is like, okay, what's the difference between an
yeah.
underground church versus what
To
we have, let's say, in New Zealand?
we're not going to persecute you. We're going to just neutralize your faith, but
Mm.
you're welcome to keep it.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's, I mean, the irony is, it's the claim is that there's no persecution.
Mm.
That's meant to be part of the genius of liberalism, is that it doesn't persecute religions. It gives all of them
Mm.
freedom. But it instead of persecuting them, it you might say desubstantializes them, or just
Yeah.
or neutralizes them, and that's why it does impose a very particular conception of what religion is, and
Hmm.
therefore what God is. And if it is an interpretation of the nature of God that's being imposed on everybody,
Hmm.
it really is something like an established church, except it
Yeah.
just never claims that.
Claims to be.
And
Yeah.
that's why it's
Yeah.
not neutral. This is a theme that was really central to my father's thought. I mean, he spent his
Hmm.
whole life making this argument
Okay.
about the non-neutrality of liberalism. He was making that argument before
Mm.
anybody had any idea what he was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
become a much more common argument these days, but
Yeah. Because it's a very
um,
subtle thing to see. Um,
you know,
and I mean it I don't know, it reminds me a little bit. So the Romans also would integrate new religions. They wouldn't just stamp them down. So they would integrate as well, right? But in a different way. They would come to the city and say, we know how to treat the gods, so the god of your city will be included into our pantheon because this is what we
yeah,
do. And in that way they've integrated them. But it's in a non-cynical, or maybe it was, but anyway, the way it was done was somehow not taking out not taking the teeth out of that religion, but
that's right.
integrating it.
Yeah, yeah, no. So I mean, it's also problematic because it sort of relativizes.
Mhm.
It would certainly not work for any monotheistic religion.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but there was something, at least. It was still pro-religion in the sense that it recognized that religion required a kind of public
Mm.
reality,
Hmm.
and that's what we don't have. We've come to approach it in a way that thinks that the only way to integrate everybody is by removing that
Yeah.
reality.
But yeah, I mean
But it changes the nature of.
yeah. So if we understand that as religion as traditionally understood, then this idea of a society that's multi-religious, I guess, especially if it's monotheistic,
Mhm.
then you get to some challenges, I guess, and some problems where you say, yeah, or is there
Yeah,
a
and
way that
you know,
you could integrate that in a society?
well, so yeah, no, so that's the thing, and I don't, you know, I feel like what this, so what's the solution?
Mm,
What's the alternative to this kind of liberal freedom of religion? Or,
mhm.
I mean, we should even call it, it's not freedom for religion because it's freedom of religion because it's a denial of religion. So it's a freedom of
From
private
religion.
faith or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Freedom from religion. I mean, it really is. It really is.
yeah, yeah.
But what would the alternative be? And that's a question that obviously always comes up at some point, and it's a really
Hmm.
hard question. But I feel like we have no idea what it is could look like. I mean,
Sure.
I think you know, um, uh, I think that there are possibilities that have not yet been explored,
Mm,
that we haven't really seen in history yet.
yeah.
But whatever they are, they have to rest at the core of whatever the right, whatever the solution is. At the core of it has to be a recovery of and a recognition of the centrality of the actual tradition. And I would say, in the West, that has to be the Christian tradition,
Hmm.
and it has to be the Christianity precisely as tradition.
Mm,
You know, that's to my mind, it's hard to see how you could recognize this without seeing the centrality of the Catholic Church, not as
mhm.
a denomination over and against
Yes.
Protestant denominations or others, but precisely as Christianity in its traditional form. Orthodoxy could make a similar argument, and
Mm,
Catholicism and Orthodoxy have all kinds of similarities. But anyway, that would have to be the core of it. But it seems to me it would be possible,
mm,
at least it seems to be the case, that one could recover the centrality of that without, and from within the resources of the actual Christian tradition, um, uh, draw out ways of respecting those that are not part of the tradition.
mm, mm.
So rather than um, determining respect from the perspective of the view from nowhere, kind of an abstract, no
Yeah.
religion is true
Mm,
perspective, generating respect from within the positive Christian tradition that has
mm.
resources to open up in a respectful way. Now, you know, that doesn't mean that's going to it's again these become very delicate. At the core of this has to be a recognition of Christianity is true.
Sure.
So it's not equally true with all other religions, but it seems to me the truth of Christianity can actually um, enhance a way of respecting people from other faiths. And when people ask me about this, I mean, I point to um, so it's really interesting when I feel like if I were to talk to somebody who is profoundly Muslim,
Mm.
grew up in a Muslim culture, in a way I would feel like that person could understand
Oh, yeah, yeah,
me as a
exactly. No, no, sure. Yeah.
better than better than a secular humanist who embraces all religion. I would say, okay, you don't understand me at all. But
Yeah,
this
yeah.
guy does understand me because he knows what it means to belong to a tradition. So it
Tradition.
would be something like that, to come, return to the center of the tradition in a way that opens up to see the relative truth of other traditions, other cultures and so forth.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, how you
So,
formulate that becomes tricky,
yeah,
but
it reminds me, I met a, what was she? I guess she was doing mission work in Lebanon. She wasn't a religious, but she was a lay person working for a Catholic organization, working with the friars and working with the Jesuits and helping out there. And so I didn't realize, but in Lebanon, it had a mixed history, Christian, Muslim, and so what's how it's formed now is that the prime minister has to be Christian, the vice, uh,
oh
the second in command has to be
yeah.
Muslim, and so the way their government is structured is
Oh,
that there's 50-50 Christian
oh,
Muslim split. And she also
yeah.
mentioned a very interesting thing that one of the imams, the Muslim imam, said to her that because Christians are starting to leave because of the situation, and he said, "Look, if all Christians leave Lebanon, it would be like a body without a soul." So there
Yeah,
was
interesting.
a deep respect
Yeah, yeah,
from both
yeah,
sides, but not denying that religion, bringing it into
yeah.
the running of
Mean
the
something.
government.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I
So,
mean that's the kind of thing. That's why I think like there are forms that this could take that we haven't really
mm,
chance to see yet.
yeah, sure.
That could be more fruitful. So in other words, the reason I say that is, um, one of the ways to dismiss this critique is to say that it entails a kind of horrifying sort of totalitarianism or something if you criticize a liberal notion of freedom, and that
Hmm.
we either have a liberal freedom of religion or we have a sort of scary imposition of the one true faith that then
Sure.
brings back burning of heretics and so forth. I mean, and that's just, you can't let the objector set the terms there, because
Hmm.
it's actually a manipulation is being baked into the terms.
Yeah.
So first of all, liberal freedom of religion is not, in fact, freedom of religion.
Hmm.
And secondly, to recover the tradition doesn't necessarily mean burning heretics.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure. Yeah.
that you can make an argument for uh, the truth of Christianity as preserving a kind of freedom of religion better than a liberal model. So,
Hmm.
and a liberal model is itself a kind of confessional stance in
Yeah.
spite of itself.
Hmm. No, awesome. Thanks again, and have a nice evening. Yeah, evening.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
See you.
And you have a nice morning.
Yeah, thank you. See you. See you. Bye.